Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 5, Episode 38, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Plenty of conspiracy theories circulating about the nature of these text messages that were released between Charlie Kirk's alleged shooter and his roommate/lover, or whatever the hell their relationship was. I'm not going to speculate on the authenticity of those text messages with respect to whether or not a 22-year-old would speak like that, but it's clear in reviewing the documents that some key pieces of information are missing, and even if those text messages are authentic, it's another testament to the fact that Kash Patel and many of the leaders at the FBI are buffoons. And Jimmy Kimmel has his show suspended indefinitely. There's all these cries about free speech. This has nothing to do with free speech. It's no different than Stephen Colbert. This is a business transaction, and the corporations that own these media outlets don't give a shit about free speech. It's about making money. Thank you to all my loyal listeners. I do appreciate you. If you're new to this podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1. The FBI needs to go back and take a first-year law school class on the rules of discovery.
I'm not going to speculate as to whether or not a 22-year-old kid would send text utilizing language such as retrieve and vehicle and using words that, even in common parlance for adults, we often don't use. At this point, I believe that's a fool's errand. But there are some things that are suspicious about the release of those text messages from this guy who shot Charlie Kirk, allegedly. I think you have to throw that out, even though there's so few people that listen to this podcast. I'm not under threat of having someone come to me and say, "You have defamed my client." That would actually be an acknowledgement that this podcast is breaking through, that someone approached me and said, "Hey, you've defamed my client." And I would say, "How'd you know? Did you actually listen to the podcast? Did it actually break through and reach more than 158 people this week? That someone who was intimately involved in the case said, that's bullshit. He didn't say that this kid allegedly killed Charlie Kirk. He just made a blanket flat statement that he did do it. He's not judge, jury, and executioner." And I'd say, wow, it's really happening. I'm becoming an influencer. Alas, no one's going to come and send me a cease and desist or a letter threatening that I've blasphemed or I've defamed one person or the other. This kid sends these texts allegedly, I'll throw that out, allegedly, because it's so suspicious, contemporaneous to all of the events that have transpired that we have questions about: running and jumping off the building, running into the woods, potentially changing clothes, stashing the rifle, breaking down the rifle maybe, reassembling the rifle maybe. The biggest problem that I had with those text messages was the fact that they're not time or date stamped. And I want to express to all of you who don't live in lawyer land how fucking stupid that is, that they would produce a string of texts. The FBI would produce a string of texts that weren't time or date stamped. I'm involved in many cases right now. I'm involved in many cases that aren't nearly as significant as the case of the kid who allegedly shot Charlie Kirk. And I have to routinely produce emails and I have to produce texts, the electronic communications that we all participate in on a daily basis. And I stress to any of my clients, and I will stress to you, dear listener, that if you're going to produce anything, it needs to have a timestamp. If you have an email, don't send me a copy of the email that's strictly what you said in the email or what someone else said to you. If it's in an email chain, I need the entire chain, and I need to see dates, and I need to see times. This is particularly true of text messages. You don't often, if you take a screenshot of your text, think, I need to have the date in there, and I need to have the time. And frankly, it's not easy to do, but one can do it. and one must do it in order to document when a text was sent and who it was sent to. And then the biggest part of that all, who said what and when? If I send you a text and you send a text back to me, isn't it convenient to have the dates and the times that these texts were sent? That way, if it took you 2 days to respond to me, I can document that it took 2 days for you to respond to me. Now, that may not be as relevant and may only be tangential to what was occurring in the Charlie Kirk episode, but if you are dealing, as I do, with real estate transactions and you've got dates and times as measures of this is going to close, there's a default, there's a cure notice issued, you've got 3 days to cure, you damn well better be able to document who said what and when and what the responses were and what the time frames of those responses were. This is very simple, fundamental, rudimentary legal work. I have no doubt that it's a pain in the ass for a lot of different types of clients. No one engages in any kind of contract, particularly a real estate contract, thinking this is all going to fall apart. Accordingly, most people do not document all of their communications thinking that this entire deal is going to fall apart. It's only when the deal begins to fall apart or has fallen apart that one must be focused on this type of documentation. We get this block of texts between the alleged shooter and this person that some people are referring to a roommate, some people are referring to a lover. That whole situation is still dark. It's amorphous. Don't know whether or not this kid was in love with someone who was transitioning or if this person was just their roommate. It was clearly someone that was important enough to the alleged shooter that he was willing to text them right after he allegedly shot Charlie Kirk. The problem with that string of texts is it clearly takes place over an extended period of time, but it doesn't read that way because A, there are no time or date stamps, and B, it appears if you read all of the texts together that there are text messages that are missing out of the chain. It is not an authentic back and forth chain. It is excerpts of a much larger chain or string of text messages. I'm not the first person to say this. I'm certainly not going to be the last. But the FBI and its head, Kash Patel, has completely screwed up the PR piece of this investigation, communicating information to the public. In fact, I think this guy is a complete and total jackass. You can tell he was a former podcaster. And let me give credit where credit is due. I am a podcaster. He was a former podcaster. He had a much more popular podcast than the one that you were listening to right now. He is a much better self-promoter than I am. He was able to get himself out into social media, out into the ethos of the podcast universe, much better than I have. And yet you see how this blows up in the face of someone who is now placed in a position of true responsibility. Mr. Self-Promoter comes out. He wants to be the face of the communication of information between the state government, the federal government, all of law enforcement, the media, and the public. And he's fucking it up royally. Why do I mention that? Because if you're going to release this string of text messages, absent any date or any timestamp, and you are going to release excerpts, you have to at least prep the public. You have to prep the public through the media that is what you're doing. You can't just release these text messages and say, here's the smoking gun, and have it be so obvious that A, there's no dates or times on them, that B, it's clear that these text exchanges are occurring over a significant period of time. This isn't a back and forth over the course of 30 minutes. It looks like it could be a back and forth over the course of 24 or 48 hours. And finally, C, it's clear that there are text messages that are missing that would provide at least a complete picture of the dialogue between these two parties. If you were doing a piss poor job at communicating information up and until the point that you're ready to release these text messages, you are naturally going to invite scrutiny if you release these text messages under the auspices that you have released them, with no context, with no date and timestamp, and where it's clear that you've omitted some of the material. Now, does a 22-year-old who grew up in southern Utah, who went to college for a semester and dropped out, does he speak the way that this person spoke in these text messages? I don't know. Here's the interesting thing about the whole skepticism, dear listener. Be patient. This kid is not pleading guilty, right? He's going to have a defense to these charges, right? And part of that defense will be to scrutinize all of the evidence that the prosecution has with respect to this case. And what is the prosecution now going to be leaning on by way of at least this disclosure from the FBI? It's going to be these text messages, which amount to an admission of guilt and provide all of the different particulars that you would need in order to prosecute one for a premeditated crime. We don't need to speculate as to whether or not these text messages are bullshit. This guy is going to get a defense team that will do as much. His lawyers will ask for all of the metadata from all of the text messages and emails and Discord chats, all of that stuff. They're going to ask for that information. They're going to be able to verify whether or not it's authentic. The more interesting question will be, what were the context of those messages? What else was being said between the alleged shooter and, we'll call it roommate/lover, in the 24 or 48 hours after the shooting took place? In the meantime, though, it does not appear that the FBI and its director, Kash Patel, can get out of their own way. It's basic discovery procedure, folks. You've got a text message chain, you've got an email chain, dates, times. Although much of the fervor is unhinged, people are right to question and be suspicious of this text message chain.
Act 2. Jimmy Kimmel's show being suspended indefinitely has nothing to do with free speech.
It wasn't but a few short weeks ago that I did a segment on The Late Show and Stephen Colbert, the fact that there was a huge merger going through between two organizations, and that because CBS has no principles, it's a corporation and it's only out to make money, Stephen Colbert was a casualty of the fact that if that merger was going to be held up by a partisan FCC, CBS wasn't going to stand up and protect anyone within its organization. That merger was going to go through no matter what. That's what matters. It's the money. And so Colbert was not immediately booted off the air, but it was made known that Colbert's show, The Late Show, which was started years ago by one David Letterman, would not be renewed. I made note of the fact that the show lost considerable amounts of money, so it wasn't like CBS was making a huge sacrifice in not renewing the show. It was a flagship enterprise with regard to CBS. It was their late night show. They wanted to have it like most networks want to have these sports leagues. They want to have the NFL, they want to have the NBA because it draws attention to the network, but it wasn't making any money. Enter one Jimmy Kimmel. He says some things about Donald Trump in the wake of the assassination. I think that's the appropriate word to use. If you'd like to use the word murder, that's fine as well, of Charlie Kirk. Kimmel in his monologue says things, whether or not you thought they were funny, whether or not you thought they were appropriate, doesn't really matter. That's not why ABC and Disney pulled that show. Let's talk about the real reason why that show ends up getting pulled. The FCC chair comes out, he starts to chirp. Let's make no bones about it. This is a very politicized administration, and I don't think that's any different than the last administration. The difference between the Trump administration, as I've said numerous times on this podcast, and practically every other presidential administration that we've had is Trump does it brazenly. He does it right out in the open. Every other administration does the exact same thing. They just posture so much better because they want to have the air, the pretense of civility, of equanimity, and of fairness. And then in the shadow of night, they lurch through back channels and whispers at parties, make the same kind of threats as the FCC chair just made with respect to Jimmy Kimmel. Why would Disney and ABC cave the way that they did? How does the money play into this? There is a company that owns many media properties called Nexstar. Nexstar owns a considerable number of local television stations. These are the television stations that you have in whatever city that you live in, whether it's ABC, NBC, CBS, or Fox. They own many of those local affiliates. Nexstar owns a considerable number of ABC affiliates. Nexstar wants to continue to buy local TV stations. There is a rule, an FCC rule, that prohibits one player, one market presence, one entity from monopolizing ownership of all of these local television stations. And you guessed it right, dear listener. Nexstar has petitioned the FCC to lift that rule to allow it to continue to buy these local television stations. Why is this important? Because Nexstar sees what is next, see what I did there, in local television programming. Local television stations don't make money except for on one thing, and that's political ads. And as I have commented on this very podcast on numerous occasions, you're not seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on local elections. You're now starting to see millions of dollars spent on local elections. And I don't mean your senator or your congressman. I don't mean anything having to do with the federal government. We're seeing state government officials, mayors, senators, legislators, millions of dollars being spent in these political ads. And they go on all year, because many of these elections are not tied to the federal elections that we so associate voting with. So Nexstar sees the profit to be made in owning local television stations, but they can't do it because there's an FCC rule standing in the way, and yet they've petitioned to have it lifted. Now, I think what happened was these Nexstar folks went as owners of a number of ABC affiliates. They went to their overlords at Disney and they said, listen, we're not going to play Jimmy Kimmel on our television stations because we can't piss off the FCC. We need this rule lifted in order to continue to buy television stations. And frankly, we want to be trusted partners with ABC and Disney for years to come. Why don't we compromise? That show doesn't make dick anyway, and you know how we know that? Because we own the television stations. We see the numbers. You're losing money on the show anyway. Boot that fuck. Placate the FCC chair and the Trump administration. We get that rule lifted. We can buy more of these affiliates. Affiliates are paying you these broadcast rights. That money is going to flow not only into our coffers from all that political advertising, it's going to flow up to you. Let's all play ball. None of these networks gives a shit about free speech. Neither does the New York Times or the Washington Post or any other media outlet. It's very important that we see what's happening here because it's no longer an issue about free speech. It's leveraging what all of these corporations want, the ability to continue to make obscene profits through the media. They're not going to allow any little piece of that media empire to subvert their ability to continue to make those types of profits. That's important to understand because now you see how the government exercises its leverage. There's nothing noble about this. There's no principle involved. You want to continue to make that amount of money? We see all of the angles. We see what you need from us, the government, in order to do so. Play ball with us or suffer the slings and arrows of all of those shareholders who aren't going to get that boost in the stock price from the next deal. Watch those shareholders and very likely the board run your ass out of that leadership position. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.